The moment my father said, "I take up space," the entire table laughed, and something in me quietly packed its bags. I'm Elena Cross, and that sentence didn't just sting, it relocated my entire life. We were crammed around my parents' dining table like always, elbows touching, voices overlapping, plates never quite big enough for how loud everyone got. My brother laughed the hardest, my cousins followed. Even my mother smiled in that tired, enabling way she'd perfected over decades of keeping the peace. I stared down at my plate, face hot, heart folding inward like it had done 100 times before. "Relax," my dad added casually. "It's just a joke." But jokes don't leave scars unless they were already cutting something open. And that night, as everyone returned to their conversations like nothing had happened, I realized I had just been officially reduced to the punchline I'd always felt like. It wasn't the first time I'd been made to feel like extra weight in a room that never made space for me, but it was the first time the words were said out loud. I had always been too much, too quiet, too sensitive, too different. My dreams didn't match theirs. My questions made people uncomfortable. I didn't fit neatly into the roles they'd prepared for me. My brother was the golden one. My cousins were the echoes. I was the disruption. After dinner, as plates were cleared and conversations shifted to weekend plans that didn't include me, my mother brushed past and murmured, "He didn't mean it." That was her favorite sentence. It covered everything. But meaning has nothing to do with impact. And by the time I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of the childhood room that never felt like home, I already knew I wasn't leaving out of anger. I was leaving out of clarity. 3 weeks later, I packed my life into 2 suitcases and a backpack. I didn't announce it. I didn't threaten them with distance or beg them to notice. I just chose somewhere so far away that their gravitational pull could finally loosen. A job offer had come through months earlier. West Coast, entry level, terrifying and impossible in all the ways that mattered. They thought I'd never take it. At breakfast, the morning I left, my dad barely looked up from his coffee. "You'll be back," he said casually. "People like you always come back." I nodded politely because explaining survival to people who thrive on dominance is a losing game. My mother hugged me like someone sending off a relative for a short vacation. My brother didn't even come downstairs. And just like that, I walked out of the house that had never learned how to hold me. 3,000 miles is a strange kind of freedom. At first, it felt like falling without knowing where the ground was. Tiny apartment, secondhand furniture, a city that didn't care who my family was or what I used to be reduced to. I learned to budget in weeks instead of months. I learned to be alone without feeling abandoned. I worked brutal shifts. I failed at things that had nothing to do with my past. And for the first time in my life, my mistakes were mine. No one laughed when I misstepped. No one reminded me I was too much. Slowly, invisibly, I began to expand into the space I had always been shamed for needing, and something unexpected happened along the way. I stopped apologizing for existing. The first year passed without a single visit home. The second year passed with only 2 phone calls, both from my mother, both heavy with things she didn't quite say out loud. Then the third year brought silence and opportunity. A promotion, a bigger apartment, a circle of people who chose me without obligation. One night, at a crowded table filled with friends who laughed with me, not at me, I realized something that made my breath catch in my chest. I finally had a seat where I didn't have to shrink. And in that quiet understanding, I had no idea that the table I was building would one day become the very thing my family would try to claim. Work became a rhythm I had never known before, long, grueling, but full of purpose. Every project completed felt like a brick in the foundation of a life I could finally claim as my own. I started small, a little herb garden on the balcony, a cozy corner in the apartment where no one dictated the view, the smell of fresh bread baking just for me. Friends noticed the change first. "You're glowing," one said. "It's like you've grown into the air around you." I smiled. because they didn't know the half of it. Every day I built, every late night I stayed at the office, every quiet victory was a statement. The world hadn't noticed me before, but now I was deliberately filling the space I had always been told I took up. Months later, I found the perfect location, a reclaimed warehouse, high ceilings, wide windows, and room enough for everything I had ever imagined. I signed the lease with a sense of ceremony I hadn't felt since leaving home. This was more than a space. It was a declaration. Every blueprint, every table I sketched by hand, every corner I curated screamed independence. I wasn't just surviving, I was building. I bought the biggest table first, a sturdy oak monstrosity long enough to seat 20, polished until it gleamed like a mirror. My friends helped me move it into place. "This is your throne," one joked. I nodded. In a way, it was, but it wasn't about ego. It was about boundaries, about showing myself that I belonged in every inch of the space I occupied. Unaware, unchanged, but ripe for the eventual reckoning. I didn't think about them much. I wasn't cruel, but I couldn't deny the thrill that one day they might notice what I had built without them. The table in my new warehouse became a symbol I didn't yet understand myself. Every meal, every meeting, every quiet conversation held at that table reminded me of the freedom that comes when no one dictates your presence. The first time my mother called after 2 years of silence, I almost didn't answer. Her voice was soft, measured. "Elena, your father said..." I cut her off politely but firmly. "I hear you," I said. "I'm thriving here. I'm safe. I'm whole." Silence on the other end. I could feel the tension through the phone, the weight of unspoken regret. I didn't need apologies, but I wanted acknowledgement. Recognition. They had laughed when I left, dismissed my existence, minimized my space. I didn't need them to join me at the table. I needed them to know I had created my own. And as I hung up the phone, I realized something. Laughter at your expense is only funny until you stop shrinking. 3 years later, I hosted my first gathering at the warehouse. Friends, colleagues, mentors, and strangers I had come to admire all sat around the table. Laughter rang out, rich and authentic, not at me, but because I had carved space for it to exist. I poured wine, plated dishes, and watched as everyone fit perfectly into the world I had designed. And for the first time, I felt truly untouchable. Far away, the image of my family sitting at their old table flashed in my mind. They had no idea what they had lost, or that the girl they called taking up space had built a kingdom of her own. And somewhere, beneath the surface of satisfaction, a quiet seed of reckoning began to sprout. It started subtly, a cousin tagging me in social media posts, a distant aunt commenting on my success. At first, I ignored it. I had grown used to indifference. But then came the messages. "We miss you. Why didn't you tell us? We thought you'd be home for the holidays." They didn't sound sincere. They sounded shocked. Shock at the life I had created without their validation. I read each one carefully, letting them linger before deleting or ignoring. The table I built wasn't just furniture. It was a symbol, a boundary, and they were slowly realizing it. For the first time, the people who had laughed at me were curious about the space I had taken and what I had done with it. My father's call came last, late at night, the kind of time when only serious or desperate people ring. "Elena," he said, voice unusually quiet, We didn't understand. I held up a hand. "Stop," I interrupted. "Don't apologize. Don't try to explain what you didn't see. I didn't leave because I hated you. I left because I needed to exist in a space that wouldn't shrink me." His sigh on the other end was long and pained. I guess we were wrong. That word, wrong, carried more weight than any anger ever could. I smiled, not out of relief, but out of recognition. Growth often comes too late, and some tables take years to build. The first invitation to my warehouse arrived with hesitation. My mother, brave enough to ask, "Could we visit your new home? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Did I want them there? Did I want to show them the life they laughed at, the family I had built from the ground up? I typed carefully, yes, but you sit where I invite. Respect the space I've earned. I hit send. For weeks afterward, I thought about what that first meeting would feel like. Pride, fear, satisfaction, and curiosity mingled together. I didn't need them to applaud. I needed them to witness. A quiet, controlled reckoning that didn't rely on yelling or vindictiveness. The day they arrived, I guided them through the warehouse. Sunlight fell across the polished oak table I had chosen with care, stretching nearly 20 feet, enough to seat 20 people. Every chair, every decoration, every corner reflected years of my independence, my quiet victories, my refusal to shrink. My father's jaw tightened, my mother's eyes flickered with a mixture of awe and discomfort. They looked for the girl they once dismissed. They found a woman who had claimed her own territory, and as they tentatively sat down where I instructed, I realized that control, real control, wasn't about authority. It was about presence, boundaries, and respect. Finally, they were learning what it meant to be invited, not entitled. Dinner began. Conversation flowed, but differently. They listened. They paused. They realized that their laughter, their dismissals, and their assumptions had no place here. This table, this space, and the woman who owned it, all of it was deliberate. Each bite, each clink of glass carried unspoken lessons about respect, autonomy, and the subtle, devastating power of being underestimated. I watched them try to navigate this new dynamic. My heart remained steady. I didn't need their validation anymore. I was the architect of my life, the builder of my table, and the holder of my space. And for the first time in decades, they understood, maybe too late, exactly what they had missed. As the evening progressed, the tension became palpable. My family fumbled through small talk, their laughter hesitant, their smiles fragile. I poured wine carefully, offering nothing but civility. Every detail of the warehouse reflected my independence, from the wide-open windows to the carefully chosen art on the walls. They were in my world now, a world they hadn't helped build and couldn't control. My father kept glancing at the table, fingers brushing its polished surface like he couldn't believe it was real. My mother whispered apologies I didn't prompt, but I only nodded. The message had already been delivered without a word. I was no longer a child at their mercy. My brother, once the golden child, shifted uneasily in his seat. I didn't know you could. He stopped mid-sentence, realizing no one would rescue him with laughter this time. I let the silence stretch before answering softly, I always could. You just never let me. His gaze dropped to the table. Every inch of it screamed patience, planning, and persistence. This wasn't just furniture. It was a monument to quiet defiance. My family understood in a way words could never capture. The girl they dismissed had built a life so complete that it no longer depended on their approval. Midway through the evening, my mother tried again, softer this time. We were wrong to laugh, to say things we didn't mean. I smiled faintly, setting a plate in front of her. Words leave scars, but distance teaches lessons better than lectures. They had to sit with it. For years, they had taught me to apologize for space, for ambition, for being present. Tonight, I didn't apologize. Tonight, I simply existed fully and let them come to terms with the consequences of neglect. By dessert, the atmosphere had changed. Curiosity replaced judgment. Awe replaced laughter. My table had become more than a piece of furniture. It was a stage for self-realization. My father finally looked at me, really looked, and whispered, almost to himself, "You've built a life we never imagined." I didn't respond. There was no need. He would sit with that truth in silence, digesting decades of dismissal in a single meal. My brother, too, understood now that life couldn't be inherited through approval. It had to be claimed. And for the first time, I felt completely untouchable in my own space. After they left, the warehouse felt expansive and alive in a way it hadn't before. I walked around the table, running my hand across the smooth oak, imagining the life I had built, brick by brick, choice by choice. 3,000 miles had taught me that distance can heal wounds, independence can empower, and boundaries can teach lessons that laughter never could. I finally realized that my family's disbelief wasn't punishment, it was the backdrop for my triumph. The space they mocked had become a sanctuary of my own making, one that no one could take away. Weeks passed, and the messages from home grew more frequent. My father called again, tentative, almost pleading. "Elena, we want to visit again. Maybe stay longer this time." I read the words carefully, tasting the shift in tone. Curiosity replaced judgment, recognition replaced indifference. I typed my reply slowly. "You're welcome, but only on my terms." The power balance had shifted. For years, they had dictated my worth. Now, I controlled the invitation, the space, and the boundaries. And it was intoxicating. My brother sent a separate message, a mixture of admiration and guilt. "I see now what I ignored," he wrote. I didn't answer immediately. I wanted him to understand that acknowledgement alone wasn't enough. Respect required effort. My family was learning a difficult lesson. Space isn't something you can take. It's something earned, maintained, and guarded. I had spent years shrinking to fit, but now the roles were reversed. And I wasn't shrinking anymore. The next visit brought visible tension. My family tried to navigate the warehouse, their footsteps hesitant on the polished floor, eyes darting at every detail I had curated. They had never seen me in control, commanding attention without apology. My mother lingered at the table, fingers brushing the edge nervously. My father avoided my gaze. And my brother? He studied me like he had just discovered a stranger who was also family. I watched quietly, letting them understand that the table, the space, and the life it represented were mine alone. No laughter, no jokes, no belittlement would ever take it back. Dinner began, careful, polite, filled with words they hadn't spoken in years. I poured wine, served the dishes, and observed their discomfort. Every conversation circled back, subtly, to the life I had built without them. My father admitted softly, "I underestimated you." I nodded. "Underestimating me was your choice." The words were gentle, but firm, a reminder that mistakes in judgment have consequences. They were tasting the reality of my independence, finally, and the realization settled over the table like an invisible crown I had placed on my own shoulders. By the end of the evening, my family had accepted, silently, the rules of my world. They couldn't laugh, they couldn't claim the space. They were visitors, and I was the architect of every corner they had entered. As they left, I walked around my table, fingers tracing the smooth surface, and smiled quietly. This table was more than furniture. It was freedom, a testament to self-worth, and proof that taking up space can be a revolutionary act. For the first time, I felt the complete clarity of belonging entirely to myself. Months passed, and the distance between us became measured not in miles, but in understanding. My family's attempts to reclaim my attention grew more deliberate, calls, messages, hints of guilt, but I had already claimed the territory of my own life. Every inch of the warehouse, every chair around the table, every framed photo of friends and mentors reminded me that I was no longer shrinking to fit someone else's idea of importance. They had finally learned that presence isn't permission, it's a choice. One evening, my father arrived unannounced, standing hesitantly at the doorway. He looked smaller than I remembered, his confidence diminished by years of dismissals he hadn't fully realized. I greeted him calmly. "Welcome," I said. "You're in my space now, not mine and yours." He nodded, swallowing hard. The warehouse felt impossibly large, and yet intimate, filled with the echoes of laughter I had earned and the absence of the laughter I had once been forced to endure. Finally, he understood that the girl he mocked had built a life so vast and complete that no judgment could ever shrink it. My brother lingered in the background, hesitant, trying to bridge the gap years of dismissal had carved. I didn't rush him. Autonomy requires patience, and lessons of respect are never instantaneous. We shared quiet conversations over coffee, tentative smiles, and subtle acknowledgement. And yet in the same moment, I realized that the table, the literal and figurative foundation of my independence, belonged solely to me. No apology could claim it back, no nostalgia could alter it. The space I had created was untouchable. And that realization brought a quiet, potent satisfaction I had never known. By the time the year ended, my family had accepted their new roles: observers, not architects, guests rather than rulers. They laughed but carefully, they complimented but measuredly, and every single time I reminded them, through my presence, that the life I had built was mine alone. The table, 3,000 miles away from the home that never nurtured me, had become a symbol of boundaries, resilience, and undeniable strength. It was proof that space isn't given, it's claimed. And when you claim it, no laughter can take it away.